Welcome to Spruce Grove Alliance Church, your home.
Well, good morning. How are you all this morning? Yeah? Anybody feel that cold when you woke up? I jumped into the car. I was like, what is this? Yeah. Yeah, I know. Yeah. At times it's great, and other times it's awful. But we all continue to live here, and so just put up with it. You do. I know you do. But this morning, I'm excited. We've been going through a series called Encounters with Jesus. And to me, there's no real more important thing for us to do than to have an encounter with Jesus. And if you never have, let me tell you what an encounter with Jesus is like. It shakes things up a little bit. He doesn't always tell you or speak the way that you expect him to. He gives you what you need. And sometimes we come with these expectations of what God and what Jesus should tell us and what he should say and who he should fix. And Jesus is always looking at us and going, stop looking somewhere else. Stop trying to hear only what you want to hear. He always gives us what we need. And in the story that we read today, it's going to be no different, and so may it be no different for us as well. And so if you came the expectation that Jesus was going to be here for somebody else, drop that. Drop it, okay? I know lots of us came here for us, but for those of you that came for somebody else, good, but focus on you, all right? So, let's just start this morning. How many of you in this room have kids? Okay, perfect. Has anybody caught your kids doing something that they should not be doing? All right. And what is the first reaction that you see when you catch them? Does anybody just picture that in your brain? I have two boys, and let me tell you, I come around the corner. There's something about a 2-year-old that you're catching doing something, and you know he knows he's not supposed to do it. It's like this sheer panic look where I turn, and I go, Callum, and it's just this, and then throw it down, and then just kind of pretend like nothing was happening at all. Yeah, it's actually one of my guilty pleasures. Yeah, it's just so satisfying to catch them doing. It's also very cute, so it's kind of like that's why I think, right? It's cute catching them try to hide, I guess. But they are both hilarious. And they just like to pretend like nothing was happening. And I go, and Callum just straight up will lie to me now too, that little guy, hey? You just be like, Callum, did you just do that? No, I didn't do that. No, you're clearly doing it, right? Isn't it funny how kids just sometimes, like you're watching them do it and you're like, are you doing it? They're like, no, right? Now, how many of you have been caught with your hand in the cookie jar? Anybody? Okay. Yes. Now, let's share some of these stories this morning. I'm going to ask 3 of you to share. 1 in this section, 1 in this section, 1 in this section. At random, I'm not picking it. I'm just picking. No, we're not going to share this morning. I just wanted to see some panicked faces. Okay. Some people are like looking down. Right? But no, we're not going to share. But we all have those stories of how we've got caught doing something that we shouldn't have been doing. And we know exactly how it feels on the other side of that coin. We know how it looks, but we also know how it feels. And we just try to pretend like we don't exist, or we try and melt into the wall as if we weren't actually doing what you just spotted us doing. Right? It's funny how even Adam and Eve in the garden, God knows and sees all, and he goes, Adam and Eve, where are you? And they're like, hiding somewhere in the forest or the trees. He knows exactly where they are, and he knows exactly where we are. And so if you're doing something this morning that you're not supposed to be doing, no, you're all in church. You guys are doing good. But so let's read an encounter with Jesus. We're going to be reading out of John 8 this morning. And so flip there. John 8, we're going to start at verse 1. And so this is an encounter where Jesus has with a woman caught in adultery. And just before this, Jesus was in Nazareth, and he was ridiculed by his own town and his own brothers. And now they say, hey, you know what? Leave this place, right? And he didn't leave right away, but then he did leave, and now he's in Jerusalem, and that's where we find him. And so, John 8:1, we're going to read just from verse 1 to 11 and go through it this morning. So let's start. Jesus returned to the Mount of Olives, but early the next morning, he was back again at the temple. A crowd soon gathered, and he sat down and taught them. As he was speaking, the teachers of religious law and the Pharisees brought a woman who had been caught in the act of adultery, and they put her in front of the crowd. "Teacher," they said to Jesus, "this woman was caught in the act of adultery. And the law of Moses says to stone her. What do you say?" They were trying to trap him into saying something they could use against him. But Jesus stooped down and wrote in the dust with his finger. They kept demanding an answer. So he stood up again and said, "All right, but let the one who has never sinned throw the first stone." Then he stooped down again and wrote in the dust. And when the accusers heard this, they slipped away one by one, beginning with the oldest, until only Jesus was left in the middle of the crowd with the woman. Then Jesus stood up again and said to the woman, "Where are your accusers? Didn't even one of them condemn you?" "No, Lord," she said. And Jesus said, "Neither do I. Go and sin no more." So as we read this story, there is a lot more encountering Jesus than just the woman. I think sometimes we read that and we go, we need to learn how this woman encountered Jesus. There's a lot more in here. And so first, the woman caught in sin, now used as a trap, as bait, dragged out into public view. Okay, and number two, we have the Pharisees and the teachers of the law actively using a woman to trap Jesus. They're not there to listen, but to expose Jesus for being something that he is not. And then number three is the crowd. There's a lot of people there. They're there to observe, to listen, or maybe they were just at the temple at the time. And now they're there to listen, I guess, just because they're there. So these three different groups are three completely different ways to encounter Jesus. And so there's so many people in this room. All of us are going to encounter Jesus probably in a different way this morning. You're all different. And so let's see, how is it that these people are encountering Jesus? Number one, okay, let's look at ourselves. Maybe we find ourselves trapped in sin, like the woman. And our sin is dragged out into the light, maybe by somebody, or just because we got caught. Number two, maybe we're like the Pharisees. We're not listening. We haven't been listening for a long time. We show up, but we're not. We're not even there to listen. We're in fact there to tell others and point at their sin. And maybe we're even there to tell Jesus that he's being untrue and false. You're wrong, God. Maybe number three, we come to listen, like the crowd, to hear more about and from Jesus, whether it's to gain or whether it's just out of curiosity. It's like, what are you going to say today, God? Let's find out. Or maybe you're just here. You're like, I don't know how I showed up here, Josh. I'm somehow in this chair, right? Who are we? So what happens in this encounter? What happens? Let's kind of digest the encounter a little bit. And so let's start at verse 2. Where are they? We know that they're in Jerusalem. They're at the temple. And Jesus is teaching a crowd. He came there, and then people gathered around, and he started teaching them. So that's where we are. Okay, and a woman is then dragged out into public. Have you seen a woman dragged into a crowd? No, probably not. Maybe. That'd be shocking. But if this woman's dragged out, seemingly caught in adultery, seemingly, and they put her in front of the crowd, and they make a spectacle out of her. And so let's pinpoint just one person in our lives. We know that they sin, and we haul them through the doors, right? That's what's happened here. And then we get to verse 4, the final interaction with Jesus, where we finally get to hear them say what this whole thing is about, and then what his response is. So verse 4, teacher, they call him. Maybe it's out of mocking or out of some kind of you don't believe somebody's a teacher and you call them a teacher and you're getting ready to tell everybody why they're not a teacher, right? That's probably what this is. Teacher, they call him. This woman was caught in adultery, and the law of Moses says to stone her. But what do you say? Yeah, the law says this, but we're waiting for you to say something contradictory. We're waiting. That's what they want to happen. They're baiting Jesus. They are just ready. And as soon as he says something contradictory, they're gonna get him. Yeah. And so here, what does that actually say? Does the Bible actually say, right? Because then they quote, this woman was caught in adultery. The law of Moses says to stone her. Does it actually say that? Yes, it does. Leviticus 20:10. If a man commits adultery with another man's wife, with the wife of his neighbor, both the adulterer and the adulteress must be put to death. Or says it in another place as well, in Deuteronomy. And so the teachers of the law, they know the law. They know what it says. This adulteress must be put to death. What do you say, Jesus? And this is where Jesus doesn't give them what they want. And instead, he just kind of hears that, and then he stoops down, writes something in the dirt, in the dust. And how many of you have asked Jesus for an answer and got no words from him in return? Instead, just silence, and you're like, why are you not talking? Right? Tell me. And instead, maybe Jesus is standing there let me just draw a picture in the dirt here for you. Right? And we go, why are you doing this? And this is what the Pharisees are doing as well. They then persist and demand an answer. Stop writing stuff in the dust, Jesus. And I think sometimes we get a little bit annoyed as well, waiting. We want it to be how we want it to be. We want him to say. We want him to speak clearly, audibly. And yet, how many of us have received maybe just words that he's written down? All of us. We go into the Bible and we read all the time. We want him to say something else. We go and we read out of maybe John or something, and we go, Jesus, speak today. And we go and read, and he's written something amazing there that we need to receive. And we go, say something else, right? Don't draw stuff in the dust and make it unclear for me. I want it nice and clear. And so they do demand. They do. And then how does Jesus respond? Surely he knows the law. Surely he could just, do the little, the law switcheroo and go, let me tell you, I know exactly. Right? Instead, Jesus responds by saying just this. All right, but let the one who has never sinned throw the first stone. The beautiful part about what Jesus just said there is that that is the law in a nice, subtle way. Jesus knows the law very well. And Jesus is actually quoting some scripture from it. And we'll get into that in a bit. But then he says that. Those who are without sin throw the first stone. And then he gets down again, and he writes something else in the dust. And after he does that, then the accusers leave. First, the oldest, and then they all go. And so all of us know that there's got to be something to what Jesus wrote in the dust. What is it? Why not just tell us this morning? Why is it cryptic? Why is it that we cannot receive what he wrote in the dust? Right? Why isn't it we just know what it is that he put there? Because it seems important. Because he wrote something, there was no reaction. He said something, seems very brief, and then he just wrote something down again. And so scholars have speculated for a very long time, and we're going to speculate this morning as well. And I have a whiteboard up here. Maybe you saw it. Maybe you didn't. Okay? We have this big whiteboard. We're going to speculate maybe what Jesus wrote. Now, speculation of what's in the Bible, do it properly. All right? You don't want to just do bad guesswork. Okay? But the reason I'm doing this is because there is so many things that Jesus writes, and Jesus knows. We're going to look through it logically of what he likely could have wrote, but also what is it that he wants to write that we need to hear, or what do we think the Pharisees need to hear? So that can maybe help us to figure out what he wrote. So maybe, because he's saying something about sin, right? Those without the first sin, throw the first stone. And so maybe he stooped down. And let's write some sins here, okay? Adultery. That one should have been obvious. That's why they hauled her there. Right? Maybe he then wrote, a little bit of a elaboration. Lust. Okay? Maybe he wrote lies. Maybe he wrote gossip. Maybe he wrote slander. Take your pick. There's so many. We don't need to continue. But writing down these sins, the Pharisees begin to see that he's not just poking at her sin. He's going, look, how you doing, Pharisees? Doing good there? How about gossip? You doing good there? How about lust? You doing good there? What about slander? Hauling this woman out, pointing at her, and then he says, the first of you without sin, throw the first stone. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe Jesus wrote a verse, okay? Maybe that's what he did. So I'm going to write a verse. I found one that I thought made a lot of sense in context with what we're talking about today. And so this is what I'm going to write. I acknowledge, forgive my slow writing, sorry. I acknowledge my sin to you. And I do not cover my iniquity. I said, I will confess. Right, this is a lot of writing, right? My transgressions to the Lord, and you forgive the iniquity of my sin. I'm not going to write the rest. You get the picture. But maybe he just did this. Psalms, I don't know how to spell well. There we go. Psalms 32:5. I acknowledge my sin to you. I did not cover my iniquity. I said I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgive the iniquity of my sin. And then next to Psalms 32:5, he wrote, King David, an adulterer. Right? An adulterer. And this is what David knew of the God that he loved and he followed and he served. I will confess my transgressions, and you forgive the iniquity of my sin. And then maybe he wrote, not stoned, forgiven. Because King David was a man after God's own heart, not stoned for his adultery, but forgiven. But one that was willing to look at his sin, acknowledge it. That's the first two words. I acknowledge. I acknowledge. I will confess my transgressions to you, God. Because I know it's not me that can forgive myself. It's you. Only your forgiveness matters. Maybe he wrote that. One last one. And this is the one that he quotes. And so this would make, to me, the most sense. But the Pharisees are teachers of the law, right? And so it makes sense that Jesus would use the law to convince somebody that is only convinced by the law. You can convince them with this. I think this is good. It feels good, right? We can speculate all these things, but let's put down what he quoted. There's another side. Isn't that great? Yeah, I know. And so let's write what he quoted. I'm not going to write the whole thing. I'm just going to write the verse, okay? Because what he quotes comes out of Deuteronomy 17. 6 to 7. It also comes out of Deuteronomy 19, 15 to 19. So let's read those. Deuteronomy 17, 6 to 7. This is a part of the law. But never put a person to death on the testimony of only one witness. There must always be 2 or 3 witnesses. The witnesses must throw the first stones. And then all the people may join in, and in this way you will purge the evil from among you. Jesus quotes something that should lead us and lead the Pharisees here. You without sin throw the first stone. And the teachers of the law should know the law very well. And so when they hear that, it should lead them here. And perhaps this is why the oldest leaves first. Because he is the one that should know the law the best. Let's read the next one. Deuteronomy 19, 15 and 19. You must not convict anyone of a crime on the testimony of only one witness. The facts of the case must be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. If a malicious witness comes forward and accuses someone of a crime, then both the accuser and accused must appear before the Lord by coming to the priests and judges in office at that time. The judges must investigate the case thoroughly. And if the accuser has brought false charges against his fellow Israelite, you must impose on the accuser the sentence that he intended for the other person. And in this way, you will purge the evil from among you. You can't just stone. And guess what? If you're wrong, and this woman is not actually an adulteress, are you willing to throw that stone first and be wrong? Then guess what? We stone you as well. Or we stone you because we find out that you're wrong and you're a malicious accuser. And so Jesus says, he without sin throw the first stone. And he writes in the dust, and then they just walk away. What is it that he wrote? Whatever it is Jesus wrote, this is what we can know for sure, is that the Pharisees walked away understanding the shame and guilt and weight of their own sin. They couldn't lift a rock to throw. That is what we know for sure. And so an encounter with Jesus here, let me tell you what you know you can take away, is that you are a bunch of sinners. I don't know if that comforts you. But here, the Pharisees needed to hear it. And so do some of us. Stop accusing your brother or your sister. Stop that. You sinner. Are you even accusing them for the right reasons, or are you accusing them falsely? You're just deflecting. You're just aiming the target at somebody else. You're like, my life is a mess. Target over here, though. Everyone pay attention to that. This person who's clearly sinning more than anybody else. An encounter with Jesus left them understanding the weight of their sin. But then we have the woman. This is after the Pharisees leave. And Jesus says, "Where are your accusers? Didn't even one of them condemn you?" "No, Lord," she says. And then this is Jesus again. "Neither do I. Go and sin no more." He's not just saying, "Oh, let's forget about your sin. You're not condemned, just leave." That's not what he's saying. No, he still addresses it, but it's filled with an immense amount of grace, an immense amount of love that this woman actually doesn't deserve. What the law says she deserves is a stoning. And Jesus goes, no. Let's forgive, but go and sin no more. An encounter with Jesus is what some of us need. Is your life filled with sin? Maybe, like I said, you're the one that got dragged out. Your sin is out in the open. And Jesus wants to just tell you that your sin has been paid for. He did it for you. Let me elaborate how awesome of a story this is, all right? If we continue to read, because what about this crowd, right? What about the crowd? We haven't mentioned them really. And in verse 30, it says, "Even as he spoke, many believed in him." Jesus continues to speak, and it says, as he spoke, many believed. And they were witnesses to the love of God. They heard it, they watched him, and they received it. They were convicted, and they chose to change their lives in response to what they witnessed. But then let's go a little bit further. Let's go to verse 59. This is why you need to know the full story. It elaborates even more. Because as Jesus continues to speak, he continues to challenge the crowd. He's not done. He's shown grace. But there's more he needs to say. And he goes and he says it. "I am the light of the world." And this is how some respond, by following him. And in verse 59, it says, "At this they picked up stones to stone him. But Jesus hid himself, slipping away from the temple grounds." The story begins with a woman being dragged out, her sin being dragged out into the front, and it ends with Jesus taking her place. Instead of her being stoned, he's the one that's going to receive him on her behalf. It says he hid because it's not his time yet. He knows his time, and his time came. But he took her place. And so are we the crowd? We come, we listen. And some of us, We come every Sunday, we have an encounter with Jesus, and we go, I need to change my life. Jesus shows us his great love, his great grace, his immense beauty, and how he just gives gentleness and comfort to situations where they're very hostile. He has things to teach us. He is the light of the world, not you. He is in us. And so maybe we receive that and we go and we leave this place changing ourselves, going, we need to change more after you. And we allow him and his Spirit to sanctify us, which means to change us more into his image every single day. Or maybe we are a part of that crowd that hears. We come, we see, and we leave unchanged. Or maybe we're a part of the crowd that goes, God, be quiet. I don't want to hear that. I see my sin. I see it. But stop talking. And we start to hurl insults. Or we start to just throw, God, how dare you? Right? My circumstance. Do you even help me, God? Do you even speak? Why are you just poking in the mud like some child, right? Stop. I want to hear from you, God. But Jesus is showing us, and he's speaking, but we're just not listening. What does Jesus write on the board for us? Okay, we can speculate about what he wrote in the dust. Oh, don't worry, I don't need that anyway, because I don't need to write anything with my hand. I'm going to leave it empty. Because what we know, we don't need to speculate for what Jesus needs to say to us. We know. And when he speaks, he convicts. His Spirit comes in and shows us, like it just strikes us straight to the heart. His word is a two-edged sword. It hurts sometimes. What is it that so put yourself in this story. We are part of the crowd, maybe. That's who we are. That's what we know where we sit right now this morning. Or maybe we are the Pharisees, pointing at somebody else's sin, deflecting, pretending like there's no problem with us, there's a problem with this person. Or maybe we're a part of the crowd, participators, just observers maybe. What's your heart posture? When we encounter Jesus, are we ready? Are you listening? Are we listening, or are we just, are our ears closed? And I think we can see ourselves in different seasons as both. But who are we this morning in this Pharisee, an adulteress, or somebody in the crowd? Let's have an encounter with Jesus this morning. Let's close our eyes. Let's close them to focus. If you keep your eyes open, as long as you're focused. What is it that Jesus writes in the dust in front of you? You were there. We always are encountering him. What is it that he writes in front of us that we need to hear? Maybe we need to hear a psalm of King David saying, "My transgressions I admit, but you are the one that forgives." Maybe we need to hear that. Maybe we are only convinced by the law. And Jesus says, you, without sin, cast the first stone. And it just points to our inward sin that we have not addressed, our inward battle. Or maybe it's us in the crowd, and Jesus just wants us to pay attention, to open our eyes in our daily lives, to be ready. There are so many things that he has to say.
Thanks for listening to this week's message from Spruce Grove Alliance Church. For more information or to hear past messages, please visit sgac.net.